Good morning, everybody. I hope you are doing well on this Sunday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are. This is Ruthie, the founder of Defy the Status Quo. I am your radically authentic personal brand strategist who is struggling to get her lighting right this morning. It's been a busy morning. I was already on Clubhouse giving my 7 tips for radically authentic marketing in a room that I participate in quite often. So it was pretty exciting to be asked to, or invited rather, to come speak before their audience. So it was quite the honor for me. And today, what I'm going to be talking about in like less than 9 minutes will be separating you from your brand. And this is actually a topic that came from the room I just did this morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So this topic came up, like, what about separating yourself from your brand? Like, we're talking about radically authentic marketing. What about when it's time to separate you and your brand? And so then the other question, I think the first question to answer is, should you separate yourself from your brand? And if you are catching this live, please give me a hashtag live. And if you're watching the replay, give me a hashtag replay, or just drop me some emojis or something like that, just to let Facebook know that this is definitely some content worth seeing. So should you separate yourself from your brand? I think that for the most part, this is a question you'll have to ask yourself, but I think that it kind of naturally happens as your company grows. And so what we tend to see, like, so if you're looking at a huge, giant company, maybe a publicly traded one or whatever, their people may have personal brands, right? And then the company has a corporate brand. Right. So employees may have personal brands and then the corporation itself has its big overarching brand. But when you're at the level where you are the main face of your company, most people aren't going to see a difference. Even if you have a small team or whatever, if you are the main driver of your company, most people aren't going to see the difference. Hey, Tim, thanks for joining me this morning. Most people aren't going to see the difference. And so to that point, then comes another question. Can you separate yourself from your brand? Is your audience going to allow you to separate yourself from your brand? And again, depending on the size of the company, the answer is, probably no. The other side is, a lot of times when we talk about our audience, and it depends on what it is we're talking about separating. If we're talking about, the CEO of a company, just their kid got into college and they're really excited, well, that's kind of more on the personal side of things. But if the CEO has a habit of dropping racial slurs when they think nobody is listening, well, I think that the audience is probably going to tie that to the brand. And so there's a kind of a distinction there as well. Can you separate yourself from your brand? And then my other question is, do you want to? Do you want to? Because is it all really just business? Is it? I mean, I know that some people take that stance, and I'm not going to say you're like wrong for that. So please don't come in the comments being like, oh, well, that's how I operate. It's all just business. Like, that's fine. That's you. But the thing that I want to say too is that there's power in the brand. There's power in the brand. How are you going to use it? I think it's almost like not a misuse of power, but certainly not using the brand power to its fullest extent if you're choosing not to use it to uphold certain values. And then that kind of does go back to that question of, can you separate yourself? Should you separate from yourself from your brand? If you do not do the work of actually establishing concrete brand values, how do you know? Right. And so you've got companies like one I'll point out, Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's is an ice cream company, but they have long been, advocates and visibly supporting, diversity, equity, and inclusion, Black Lives Matter. Like, they've been visible about that. And as a company, if you have not established the value of every single human being deserves at least the opportunity for an equitable life, or, you don't embrace the value of, hey, equity is one of our values. If you don't actively and concretely embrace that, then you're going to constantly question, oh, should we talk about this or should we talk about that? If it's concretely in your brand values, then of course you absolutely should be talking about it. right? And so I find that, and this may surprise you, but with bigger companies, right? So what about for large companies, companies where they do have like the CEO and like all these employees and people, other people in their C-suite, and then the brand, and then there's personal brands, right? And so that's true, certainly. But you might be surprised at how many large companies don't actually take the time to concretely establish their brand mission, purpose, values. How I like they throw something up there on the website, but the company itself, the company culture doesn't actually embody it. And so that's how these things come up. Should we support this individual who is kneeling during the anthem? Should we talk about Black Lives Matter? Should we talk about the attacks that occurred in Atlanta? Should we talk about those things? If you have established diversity, equity, and inclusion as a value, the intrinsic value of human beings as a value for your company, it is no longer should we talk about those things. It's how do we support our employees during this time? How can we show our employees that we care about what they're going through, even though it's not directly related to the business? How can we communicate that to our audience? How can we make sure that people understand that we care and understand? How can we show that? So it's no longer about should you do it, it's how can we? And that all ties back to the brand values. Does the company, as a living organism, live and breathe the brand mission, purpose, values, and the vision? Does it live and breathe that, or are those just pretty things that you put up on your website? And you have to, and then looking at, okay, this conscious consumerism trend, like people like, oh, well, I just sell t-shirts, or I just sell pens, or, I just do social media, which, I mean, it goes back to that point. There's power in your brand. How are you going to use it? So this title here, separating you and your brand, I think by now here, we're 7 minutes in, it's pretty evident that I don't really think that there is a separation between you and your brand, particularly at the small level. At the small level, when you're the primary face, it's just you, or it's you and external teammates, or you and just a few internal teammates. I don't really think that there is a division between you and the brand. And then I think that for large companies, what ends up happening is the brand, because it's got so many different spirits, hearts, and minds involved, it becomes a living organism. But you, as the creator of that brand, need to guide the development of that organism, of that corporation, organization, nonprofit, whatever it is. You have to guide the development of that, and don't let it just happen all haphazard. You don't want your brand, like your brand is almost like a person. And so it's up to you to guide the development of that brand. So eventually, yes, once a company gets big enough, there is like this separation between like your personal brand and your company. But that doesn't mean that your company doesn't still stand for something, right? And your brand mission, your purpose, your values, and your vision are going to be what guides the decision making from the highest levels all the way down to the lowest levels. That's how decisions should be made. Tim agrees. Tim's like, I agree. I'm great. So that's what I think. That's what I think. I don't think it's really about separating, like, should you actively separate you and your brand? I think at the lowest levels, that doesn't really happen. It shouldn't really happen. You need to remain agile, and that's just the easiest way to do it, honestly, and the most genuine way to do it. As your company grows and becomes larger and kind of is a meeting ground for a lot of hearts, minds, and spirits, then it will naturally separate from your personal brand as a corporate brand, but it still needs to be intentional and guided so that way it can actually stand for something. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. And don't forget, I still need to talk to my accountability buddy for these 45 lives in 45 days thing. But once this is over, these live streams will only be in the Defiant Business group. So do be sure to type that in, the Defiant Business group, in your search bar, and go ahead and join the group, because I will still probably go back to once or maybe twice a week going live here on my Facebook personal profile, if that's where you've seen this. So thank you so much for joining me this morning, and I will see you tomorrow.